Welcome to the new series of the adult education on this Zoom webinar, which is called Shabbos Inside Out. Shabbos is that beautiful island of serenity, that step out of the creation into the Creator. And in this series, we're going to have a look at Shabbos, not only at its laws and customs, but specifically, and in addition to its mystical perspective. What is the Chassidus, the Kabbalistic, the inner dimension of Shabbos? So, in order to do that, we actually need to start at the beginning. And at the beginning is a close inspection of the scriptural verses of the Pesukim in the Torah and in the Tanakh that speak about Shabbos. Now, I know a lot of people call it Shabbat, some people call it the Sabbath. I'm going to use Shabbos because that's the expression which I'm most familiar with, and that comes, so to speak, straight off the tongue. We wish each other a very good Shabbos. So let's start, as we said, right at the beginning. In Bereshis, in the very first parsha of the Torah tells us as follows. In 6 days, God created the world, and on the seventh day, Vayechulu hashamayim v'ha'aretz v'chol tzava'am. Heaven and earth and all their hosts were completed. Vayechal Elokim b'yom hashvi melachto asher asa. And with the seventh day, Hashem, God, finished all the work that he had done. Vayishbois b'yom hashvi. He rested or ceased from doing work on the seventh day. Mikol malachtoi asher asa, from all the work which he had been doing. Vayevorech Elokim es yom hashvi vayikadosh osai. And God blessed the seventh day, and he declared it to be holy. Ki voy shavas mikol malachtei asher bara Elokim lasos. For it was on this day that God ceased from all the work that he had been creating, so that he could do it. Lasos, which God created to do. What is fascinating about this passage is that it says that God finished his work on the seventh day. Now we know that the seventh day is a day of rest. In what respect did he finish his work on the seventh day? So our sages of blessed memory says there was something missing. What was missing? Menucha, tranquility, calm. Ba Shabbos, ba menucha. When Shabbos comes, so too with it comes that menucha, that rest, that tranquility. That's the island of serenity that we just mentioned. Magically, when the ladies light the Shabbos candles, when we usher in the holiness of Shabbos, there descends that atmosphere of calm, of rest, of peace, of Shabbat Shalom, of the peace and serenity and tranquility of Shabbos. Now, the Torah specifically says that he rested from all melachtoi asher asa, the work which he had done. So the Torah makes reference here to the idea of melacha. Melacha meaning work. And that indicates that during the 6 days of creation, God worked in making the world. Also in this passage, we have God's blessing conferred on the Shabbos day. And of course, we're not told what the blessing was, but Rashi, the great commentary, says that it was blessed with a double portion of the manna. In other words, later on, when the Jewish people would come out of Egypt, out of Mitzrayim, they didn't have food in the desert, and Hashem fed them miraculously with the manna. And, as we will learn later, a double portion of manna came on Friday, so that they wouldn't have to go out on Shabbos to collect the man. Rather, it was sanctified and blessed by a double portion of manna on Friday. So that is the opening Pesukim, verses which talk about Shabbos. And it tells us Shabbos was the day that Hashem rested from creation. We now move on to the next reference about Shabbos, which is in the parsha of Beshalach, which we just made reference to beforehand. The Jews had come out of Egypt, crossed miraculously the Red Sea, and now they ran out of provisions. So they complained to Moshe Rabbeinu, and Moshe miraculously tells them that they're going to be fed day by day by the mon. They had to collect only a specific amount each day. The next day it had disappeared, and on Friday a double portion of mon was going to be given. So Moshe says like this to them. He says, tomorrow, in other words, it was Friday, is going to be a day of rest. God's Shabbos. Bake what you want to bake, cook what you want to cook, and whatever you're left over, put aside carefully until tomorrow. Some people actually went still out to gather them on Shabbos morning, but they found nothing. So God said to Moses, how long will you refuse to keep my commandments and my law? You must realize that God has given you the Shabbos. And that is why I gave you food for 2 days on Friday. On the Shabbos, everyone must remain in their designated place. One may not leave his home to gather food on Shabbos. And so the people rested on Shabbos. It's interesting. The Hebrew reads, Re'u, see, ki Hashem nosan lachem HaShabbos. There was a clearly demonstrated sign that Shabbos had been sanctified, in that the manna fell every day of the week. On Shabbos it didn't come. A double portion was given on Friday. And of course, to commemorate that double portion of man, we have two chalot on Friday night to remind us that a double portion of man was given on Friday. And of course, the reason why we cover the challah, there are two reasons given. One reason is because we're going to make the blessing of wine before the bread. Technically, bread should be blessed before wine. So we cover the bread so that it shouldn't be embarrassed by the blessing that we make on the wine before the bread. But the other reason which is given, because just like the manna when it fell was covered with a layer of dew, so too we cover the two challahs with a challah cloth to remind us of the dew which kept the man fresh in the desert. Another item which we find in this passage is that a person shouldn't move out of their designated place on Shabbos. This is what we call Tuchum Shabbos, the extent that a person may actually go out of their place on Shabbos. Scripturally, according to the Torah, one may walk 12 kilometers, Yud Beis Mil, outside the town. However, our sages instituted that a person should not walk more than 2,000 amas, approximately a kilometer outside of the city. Within the city, within a built-up area, a person can walk in a town as much as they want. However, outside the city, they shouldn't go beyond the tuchum, beyond the boundary of going out on Shabbos. And here we find that the people rested on the Shabbos day. The next reference is in the Parsha of Yisro, where we find the 10 Commandments. In the fourth of the 10 Commandments, the Torah says the following: Zocher es Yom HaShabbos lekadshay. Remember the Shabbos to keep it holy. Sheishes yomim tavoid. You should work for 6 days. V'yosisa kol malachtecha, and do all your work. V'yom hashavi'i, but on the 7th day, Shabbos l'Hashem elokecha, it should be a Shabbos for Hashem. Lo yisasa chol malacha. You should not do any work. Ata, you, uvincha, your son, uvitacha, your daughter, avdecha, your servant, v'amoscha, your maidservant, uvehemtecha, your animals, v'gerecha shebisharecha, or the gerim in your gates, the foreigners or the strangers in your gates. Why? What is the reason? Ki sheishes yomim asa Hashem es hashamayim ves haaretz. Because Hashem made the world, the heavens and the earth, in 6 days. Es hayom ves kol asher bom, the sea and everything which is in it. Vayonach bayom hashavi, and he rested on the 7th day. Al kain, therefore, beirach Hashem es yom hashabbos vayikadshehu. God blessed the 7th day to make it holy. So, in the account of the 10 Commandments, what do we see? First of all, Zocher es Yom HaShabbos. We need to remember the Shabbos day. Now, seemingly, that's quite difficult to do, because we're not going to forget that at the end of 6 days, there's going to be a 7th day. What does it mean to remember the 7th day? So our sages interpret it, Zachreu b'kniksasei u'b'yitziasei. We need to make a mention of it. We need to proclaim its inception and its exit. In other words, when Shabbos comes in, we need to make a verbal declaration of the sanctity of Shabbos. That's what we call Kiddush, because from the word Kodesh, we sanctify and make holy the Shabbos day verbally. The sages instituted that we do it over a cup of wine. And when Shabbos finishes, we also make a verbal declaration of its finish, and that's called Havdalah, the separation between the Shabbos and the weekday. So that's the idea of remembering the Shabbos day. Also it says here, Sheishes Yomim Tavoid. You should work during the 6 days of the week. In fact, there are those that enumerate this as a mitzvah, that it is a mitzvah to engage in activity which brings in a income during the 6 days of the week. And then the Torah now details whom should rest, specifically the family, also the strangers, and in fact also one's animals. So an animal may not be used to plow or to pull a cart, for example, on Shabbos. And then finally, it tells us, why did Hashem tell us to keep Shabbos? Because he himself created the world in 6 days, rested on the 7th, and we are to emulate Hashem. The idea of who should rest is also stated in the next Sedra, in the Parsha of Mishpatim, where it also repeats and says, you may do whatever you must during the 6 days, but you must stop on Saturday. Your donkey and ox must then be able to rest, and your maid's son and the foreigner must be able to relax. So we see again that this idea of stopping work and who should stop is mentioned then as well. Now we come to the Parsha of ki sisa. Now, here, got to put this into context, the Jewish people had been told to build a mishkan, a tabernacle. And this tabernacle was a place where the Shekhinah, where the divine presence would rest. It was built after the people had atoned for the sin of the golden calf. So, in this parsha, it says the following. Vayomer Hashem al Moshe, Lema, God said to Moshe, saying, Ve'ata daber el bnei Yisrael lemer, speak to the Jewish people, saying the following: Ach es shabsoisai tishmoru. You must, even though you've been told to build the tabernacle, you must still keep Shabbos. In other words, the building of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle, was not and does not override the prohibition of Shabbos. You must still keep Shabbos. Why? And here it introduces a new dimension of Shabbos. Ki ois hi beini uveinechem, because it's a sign between me and you, l'dorosechem, for all generations, lodas, to know, ki ani Hashem mikadishchem, that I am God making you holy. So here's a new dimension. It says, why should we keep Shabbos? Because it's a sign between God and the Jewish people. Ushemaritem es Shabbos, and guard the Shabbos, ki kodesh lochem, because it's holy for you. Mechalaleha mois yumas. Here it introduces a new concept that somebody who is mechalel Shabbos, who desecrates the Shabbos, gets a punishment of dying, capital punishment. Ki kol ha'oise va melacha v'nichrasa hanefesh hahi mikerav ameha. Because anybody doing work on Shabbos will be spiritually cut off from their people. Sheishes yamim yeyaseh melacha. In 6 days work shall be done. Uvayom hashvi, but on the seventh day, Shabbos Shabbosain. It uses a double expression here. It's a Shabbos of Shabbos, Kodesh LaHashem, holy to God. Kol ha'oisa melacha b'yom ha'Shabbos mos yumas. Anybody who does work on Shabbos will be put to death. Then it tells us, V'shamru b'nei Yisrael es Shabbos. The Israelites shall thus keep Shabbos, Lases es Shabbos l'doiroisam b'ris olam, making the Shabbos for all generations an eternal covenant. Beini ubein b'nei Yisrael oisi li'olam, between me and between the children of Israel, it's an eternal sign. That in 6 days Hashem, God, made the heavens and the earth. Uvayom hashvi, and on the seventh day, Shavas, he ceased from doing work. Vayinofash. Now here it adds another word. Vayinofash can be translated, he withdrew to the spiritual. So what is introduced over here is that even though building the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and the indwelling of the Shekhinah is amazing, but the keeping of Shabbos overrides that. In fact, our sages say that the juxtaposition of the idea of building the Mishkan and not doing any melacha, work on Shabbos, teaches us that the definition of melacha is any type of melacha, of work, that was involved in building the Mishkan. The Mishnah in Tractate Shabbos enumerates 39 categories of work that were involved in building the Mishkan. So, for example, in the Mishkan, there was the production of dyes. In order to produce dyes, one needs to produce fire, one needs to cook, one needs to dye, etc. And then there was the weaving processes in order to produce the curtains, etc., etc. 39 categories of prohibited melacha on Shabbos. How do we know that these categories of work are prohibited? Because the word melacha is used in connection with the Mishkan. Now, what we need to do when we look at Shabbos is to understand that melacha doesn't mean hard work that we would understand necessarily hard work. So, for example, on Shabbos, it is permitted to move around chairs in a room, even though if you're moving 100 chairs around in order to set up, for example, a hall for a Shabbos meal, it's quite hard work. And if you carry, however, a small light item from a private domain to a public domain or vice versa, if there is no eruv, that is considered work. So therefore we cannot define work on Shabbos as physical labor. Rather, we must define melacha on Shabbos as the categories of work that we've done in the construction of the Mishkan. And that is something which we need to understand. What is this correlation between the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and Shabbos? Let's go further. In the Sedra of Vayakhel, Moshe assembles the entire community and says to them, this is what Hashem has told you to do. In fact, in these two Sedras of Vayakhel and Pekudei, Moshe has already received the instruction from God to build the tabernacle, the Mishkan, and here he's giving over these instructions to the people. So he says to them, at the very, very beginning, he gathers them, and in fact, it says from this idea of gathering and Shabbos, we learn that Moshe gathered the people on Shabbos to instruct them in words of Torah, and from this, and for all generations, Jews have gathered on Shabbos to hear words of Torah being read from the Sefer Torah and being taught by its teachers. So here it says, Moshe says to them again, Sheishes yomim te'aseh melacha. 6 days work shall be done. Uvayoyim hashavi, but on the 7th day, yilochem kodesh, it should be a holy day. Shabbos Shabbosan LaHashem, a Shabbos of Shabbos to Hashem. Kol ha'oser boi melacha yumos. Anybody who does work on Shabbos shall be put to death. Lo sevaru eish b'chol moshveiseichem b'yom HaShabbos. One should not kindle a fire in all your dwelling places on the day of Shabbos. Here there's an additional thing. The Torah actually specifies one of the 39 categories of work, and that is havara, not creating a fire on Shabbos. One may not light a fire, strike a match, turn on a gas ring on Shabbos to light a fire. Eish is fire. Lo sevaru eish, do not light a fire on the Shabbos day. So the sages of the Talmud discuss why was this particular melacha singled out from all the 39 at this stage. And there's a lengthy discussion which perhaps we'll touch on later in the course but not now. But it is interesting to note that Hav'ara, or lighting a fire, was singled out at this stage. So again, Moshe tells them, you're going to build a tabernacle, but on Shabbos there's no building. In the Sedra of Emor, the Torah tells us to keep the holidays, the Yomim Tovim. However, there also, Hashem spoke to Moshe and tells him the following. There are special times that are sacred holidays to Hashem. But at the very beginning, he reiterates, you may do work during the 6 weekdays, but Shabbos is a Shabbos of all Shabboses. Kol malacha le'se'asu, work shall not be done. Shabbos hi l'Hashem b'chol moshvei seichem, wherever you may live, it's God's Sabbath. So, again, even if there is a clash, for example, between Shabbos and a festival, the laws of Shabbos override that of a festival. In fact, the only festival somewhat that overrides Shabbos is Yom Kippur, when we fast even on Shabbos, and that's because Yom Kippur is also called a Shabbos even of the Shabbos. If we go forward to the Sedra of Shlach Lecha, we find an interesting episode. It says that while the Israelites were in the desert, they discovered a man gathering sticks on the Shabbos. The ones who found him gathering sticks brought him to Moshe, Aaron, and the entire community, and they put him under guard because it wasn't specified what should be done to him. And it says that he received the penalty of the capital punishment for Shabbos violation for gathering sticks. Now, the question, of course, is, what was he doing gathering sticks? And why, by gathering sticks, does this incur the death penalty? And why should the death penalty in general be leveled for somebody who doesn't keep Shabbos? Yes, that's what the Torah says, but why is it such a severe penalty? When we actually have a look in Chassidus, in the inner dimension of the Torah, we actually have a fascinating rationale for this, as we'll learn later in the course. We're now going to go forward to the parsha of Va'es Chanan. The 10 Commandments are recorded twice in the Torah, once in the Sedra of Yisroi and once in the Sedra of Va'es Chanan. So let's now read the 4th commandment as it's recorded the 2nd time in Deuteronomy in the Sedra of Va'es Chanan. Here the Torah says, Shomer es yom HaShabbos l'kadshay, guard the Shabbos day to keep it holy. And of course the sages immediately comment, well, hold on a minute. In the first set of the 10 Commandments, it says, Zocher, remember the Shabbos day to keep it holy. In the second set, it says, Shomer, God. So which did God say? Did he say Zocher, or did he say Shomer? So the sages say, he said them both simultaneously. What was written on the tablets of stone? So the sages say on the first set of tablets that was broken when Moshe came down from the mountain, there was written Zocher, and on the second set was written Shomer. Zocher actually refers to the positive aspects of Shabbos, and Shomer tells us to stay away from the prohibitions of Shabbos. So guard the Shabbos day to keep it holy, kashat sivcha Hashem Elokecha, as God has commanded you. Sheishis yomim tavoid, you should work for 6 days. V'yasisa kol malachtecha, you should do all your work. V'yoyim hashvi Shabbos l'Hashem Elokecha, the 7th day is a Shabbos for God. Lo yisasa chol malacha, you shouldn't do any work. Ato you uvincha, your son uvitecha, your daughter v'avdecha, your servant v'amasecha, your maidservant, V'shorcha, your ox, v'chamorcha, your donkey, v'chol behemtecha, all your animals, v'gercha she'b'sharecha, the strangers who are in your gates, leman yonuach avdecha v'amoscha kamocha, so that your servant and your maidservant should rest just like you. And then it says something fascinating. V'zacharta, you should remember, ki eved ha'yisa b'yeretz Mitzrayim, that you were a slave in Egypt. Vayotziacha Hashem elokechem misham, and God has taken you out of there. Biyod chazaka, with a strong hand, uvizroya nutuya, and an outstretched arm. Al kain, therefore, sivcha Hashem elokecha lases asiyam haShabbos. God has commanded you to keep the Shabbos day. What is fascinating about this is that a completely different reason for keeping Shabbos is given in the second set of 10 Commandments than the first. In the first it says the reason we keep Shabbos is because God created the world in 6 days, and on the seventh day he rested, and so too he commands us to rest on the seventh day. In the second set of commandments it says that the reason we keep Shabbos is so that you, your son, your daughter, everybody should have a rest. Even your servant and your maidservant, they should all rest, because you were slaves in Egypt and Hashem took you with a strong hand out of there. That seems to be a very different reasoning and rationale than the first set of 10 Commandments. Why the change? Those are the Pesukim, those are the verses which are brought in the Torah, in the 5 books of Moses, and we'll now turn our attention to a number of verses which are brought in the Tanakh. Principally, we're going to have a look first at some verses in the book of Yeshaya, Isaiah. If we have a look in Isaiah chapter 56, it says the following. Thus, Isaiah says the following. Thus said Hashem, Koyamar Hashem, Shimru mishpat va'asu tzedakah. Observe justice and perform righteousness. Ki krova yeshuasi lavi v'tzidkasi lehigalos. For my salvation is soon to come, and my righteousness to be revealed. Ashrei enosh yasazos. Praiseworthy is the man who does this, uven adam yachzik ba, and the person who grasps it tightly. Shomer Shabbos mechalaloi, v'shomer yoda me'asos korah, who guards the Sabbath against desecrating it, and guards his hand against doing any evil. In fact, he repeats that as well later on, and he uses the word Shomer Shabbos. Kol Shomer Shabbos mechalaloi. So the concept of a Shomer Shabbos, a guardian, person who guards the Shabbos, or what we call a Shomer Shabbat, somebody who keeps Shabbos, where do those words actually come from? They come from the verse in Yeshaya. And Yeshaya tells us that somebody who is Shomer Shabbos, that person is praiseworthy. Finally, in Yeshaya chapter 58, we have a fascinating reference to Shabbos by Yeshaya, and he says the following. This is chapter 58, verse 13. Im toshiv mishabos raglecha. If you restrain your foot because it is the Sabbath, asois chafotzecha b'yom kodshi, refrain from accomplishing your own needs on my holy day, V'korasa la Shabbos oineg. And if you proclaim the Shabbos a delight, the word oneg means a delight, likdosh Hashem, and the holy day of Shem, mechubad, is honored, v'chibadetoi me'asos derachacha, and you honor it by not engaging in your own affairs, mimtzoi cheftzecha v'daber dover, from seeking your own needs or discussing the forbidden, oz, then tisanag al Hashem, you will delight in Hashem, and I will mount you astride the heights of the world. I will provide you the heritage of your forefather Jacob, for the mouth of Hashem has spoken. Here, Yeshaya introduces us to some very new concepts. He talks about oneg and kavod. Oneg means delight, and kavod means honor. How do we delight in Shabbos, and how do we honor Shabbos? Our sages tell us that the delight to which Yeshaya is referring to is to delight in Shabbos by eating good food and drinking good drink. In fact, as we will learn later, on Shabbos, a person should expend money in order to delight and have a wonderful Shabbos by placing foods of delight on the Shabbos table. How does one honor Shabbos? With clean and special clothing for Shabbos. So, in addition to anything that has been stated until now, Yeshaya adds that Shabbos has an element of oneg, of delight, and of kavod, and of honor. In addition, we're told that the walking on Shabbos should be different than the weekday. Our dibur, our speech on Shabbos, should be different than on the weekday. And we shouldn't discuss mundane business on Shabbos. So to wrap it up all together, the Torah starts off by telling us that Hashem created the world in 6 days, and on the seventh day he rested. He asked us to emulate that by working 6 days a week, but on the seventh day not to do any malacha, to rest, to withdraw into the spiritual. As we said at the very beginning of the class, to get and move into our island of tranquility, to step out of the creation into the Creator. We're told that Shabbos has a punishment, a capital punishment, for those who desecrate the Shabbos. And that's something which we need to understand. Why is it that there's such a strong punishment given for somebody who is mechalel Shabbos, who desecrates the Shabbos? And also we need to understand, what does the word chilul or mechalel mean? What does desecration of Shabbos constitute? And why is it so harshly treated? Then we have a concept that Shabbos is an eternal covenant between God and the Jewish people, and that it's a sign between us. And then we have another concept in the second set of the Ten Commandments, that Shabbos is a day on which we are to rest in order to give our family and our servants a rest. Why? Because we were servants in Mitzrayim, in Egypt, and God took us out of there. And finally, we have introduced by the Navi, the prophet Yeshaya, the concept of oineg, of delighting in Shabbos, and kavod, and honoring Shabbos. And Yeshaya adds that somebody who honors the Shabbos and delights in the Shabbos will have a tremendous reward. In fact, our sages say that all their sins are forgiven and they are saved from the judgment of Gehinnom. To understand all of that, what we need to do is to go into the pnimius, the inner dimension of the Torah, which in Chabad is laid out beautifully in the Chassidus of Chabad, in Chabad Chassidus, and Be'ezras Hashem, in the coming talks and shiurim, we will be rolling out the whole inner dimension, Shabbos inside out, from the inside outwards, so that we'll understand Shabbos from a completely fresh and new perspective. That doesn't take away from anything that anybody has been doing until now, but it will give fresh perspective. It will give an invigorating new dimension to Shabbos, a dimension which, if a person really understands what a gift Shabbos is to us, and that's taken from the saying of our sages that Hashem had a very, very special gift which He gave us. And when you receive a gift, you have to appreciate it. And in order to appreciate Shabbos properly, you have to realize what a huge and tremendous impact it can make on you, on your family. And then you see it as a gift. You see it not for what you can't do on Shabbos, but how it maneuvers you into this beautiful island of serenity, this withdrawal into the spiritual, this commitment to spend time differently than what you do during the week, to speak differently, to engage with others differently, to learn differently, to socialize differently, and to live on a much higher and beautiful level, something which our sages call a taste of the world to come. We look forward to seeing you at further classes, please God. Be'ezrat Hashem.